Hello Year 7 and welcome back to our development topic. We are now into week 5. So far we've learned what development is, we've learned how we measure it, we've looked at how it changes over time, and we've looked at the barriers that prevent countries from developing. So this week we're going to think about how can development be supported? How can we break down those barriers we looked at, and how can we make sure that every country in the world develops and becomes developed? So we're going to do that by looking at international aid, we're going to look at fair trade, charities and NGOs, and the Sustainable Development Goals. Now this is the final week of development for us. Next week will be the Seneca Assessment on Development that everybody will be expected to do. You will do the Seneca Assessment but nothing else that week. So that is week 6, and then for week 7, our final week, we're going to have a roundup of what we've learnt in year 7. So everything we've done so far, there's some different tasks, they're designed to be a little bit of fun, but they are for you to reflect back on your geography learning journey in year 7. So just a little reminder, let's have a pen and paper ready or a Word document open for this video. Okay, so as usual, we're going to think back to last week as well as thinking about this week. So thinking of all of the barriers of development we discussed and you researched, which of these do you think provides the biggest barrier for developing countries to become developed? So you're going to pick one that is the biggest barrier, and then can you think of any ways that barrier could be overcome? So take a couple of minutes now to have a think. Give a reason for what you think the biggest barrier is. Maybe you think it's education, say why. Maybe you think it's war, say why. And then how might these barriers be overcome? Okay, lovely. Hopefully we've got some good ideas. So before I take us into this week's task specifically, we're just going to have a think about those barriers. So some of the barriers, we've seen this slide last week, but we're just going to go over that nice and quickly. So we had natural resources, we had economic barriers, so high levels of debt, colonial trade deals being unfair. We had political barriers like war, corrupt governments, not investing in the right things. We've had regional differences, so how some countries have some areas that are more poor than others. We've got social, so environmental is our final one, and by environmental we mean the physical geography of an area, what the weather is like there, what the climate is like, and all of those were barriers we looked at last week. So if you need to watch last week's video to remind yourself a bit more, you can do that, but this week we're going to focus on how we can overcome those barriers, and we're going to start by looking at aid. So what is aid? Specifically, we're looking at international aid, and it's the transfer of money, goods, services, movement of things people need from a country or an international organisation, so it's not always countries, to a different country to benefit that country or its population. So lots of the time when we think of aid, we think of it only in terms of emergencies, disaster relief, emergency aid, but actually the UK government gives out aid every year. It has an aid budget. And what you've got in front of you on the screen are the top countries that the UK gave aid to in 2017. These are the most up-to-date statistics I could find. And to the right of the screen, you've got the top 5 sectors of where that aid went. So 17% of the money we gave as aid went to humanitarian. That's usually disaster relief. 15% went to disease, health, improving healthcare, training more doctors. 14% is multi-sector, so that covers lots of things, obviously. 13% was government and civil society, and 9% went to economic infrastructure. And by infrastructure, we mean things like railway lines, roads, buildings, so improving the infrastructure of a country. And economic infrastructure would be the money infrastructure, so the areas that help bring in more money. So if you're doing task 1, you're going to follow a link and it should take you to these 2 graphs. The one you're going to need most is this one, and you are going to need to plot the top 10 countries the UK gives aid to onto a map. There will be a blank map provided, or you can just find yourself a blank world map. Make sure it's got country outlines on, that will make it much easier for you. What you will not find is countries labelled, so you may have to find yourself an atlas or a labelled world map to be able to plot where Pakistan, Nigeria, Ethiopia are. And once you've coloured in your map and maybe labelled the country names on, you're going to write down how much aid they're given from the UK government. So Pakistan, for example, is £402 million of aid in 2017. And you're also going to use the websites from previous week to write down the GNI of that country. So remember, the GNI is the gross national income, and you're going to write down that onto your map as well. There is then a challenge task for if you feel like you need to develop that knowledge a bit further, but once you've plotted onto your map, you're going to describe the distribution of aid. As you can see here, we've already been split up into continents, and we can see from that that Asia and Africa get the most aid from the UK. Okay, so that's international aid. It's the movement of goods, money, capital to other countries to benefit them from a country or an organisation. Okay, so that brings us on to tasks 2, 3 and 4 that I'm just going to briefly talk about here. So task 2 is looking at fair trade, and fair trade is an organisation that works to protect farmers and other primary sector workers, people who produce things, grow things, to give them a fair market price, better working conditions, things like that, to ensure that trade is conducted fairly. So if we think about our economic and our historical barriers, oftentimes the people with more natural resources who can grow things don't necessarily have the most money. They are locked into unfair trade deals, things like that. So this is designed to allow those industries to grow and develop without those barriers in place. Okay, so if you are looking at task 2, you're looking at fair trade. Lots of you might recognise that sticker from your bananas. Bananas are really popular, really easy to find in the supermarket, fair trade item. There are loads of others, things like cotton, chocolate, anything you can grow can be fair trade. And you are going to convince someone that they should buy fair trade. You're going to research fair trade, and then you're going to write a letter. There are some points to help you along the way in the task, and there's some websites as well. Okay, so task number 3 is focusing on something we call NGOs and charities. Now, NGO stands for non-governmental organisation. So it means they aren't government run or funded. They are international, national, or even just local organisations, usually volunteer based, that we often think of as charities. So Oxfam is one, Action Aid is another, and you are going to look at some examples of a charity. You don't have to pick Oxfam or Action Aid, you can pick any. These are just 2 examples, and you're going to look at what they do, how they try to help countries develop, and I want you to specifically try and find a project they've worked on in a country and explain a bit about it. So charities and NGOs is task 3. That leads us on to task 4, which is looking at the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, these are super important, and we refer to them all the time in geography. We'll keep talking about them when you leave year 7 all the way up. But what I want you to focus on in this task is looking at what the goals are. Now, you can see on the screen there are 17 goals. There is a website that if you follow it, you can hover over each picture and it tells you a bit about the goal, but the main aim is to end poverty and improve life for everyone, and the UN recognises that those things have to work together. So developing and developed countries have to work together. We have to look at improving health, education, reducing inequality, and looking after our environment. So we can see here we've got end poverty as one, so no more poverty. Zero hunger is another. Gender inequality is on there that some of you looked at last week. Climate action. So there are 17 different goals, and you are going to summarise them. So you're not just going to do all 17 because that would be far too many. You're going to pick one. You can do 2 if you feel like that was too quick, and you're going to create a cartoon educating people on why that goal is important. Now, there are 2 links on the slide you can see that will be on the sheet, 2 cartoon examples already. You can use that as a basis, but I want you to do your own cartoon. So just to summarise, task 1, you're going to need either the worksheet or a blank map. You're going to plot the top 10 UK countries, the top 10 countries the UK provides aid to. You're going to put on their GNI, and then you're going to describe the distribution of those countries. as a challenge if you want to give that a go as well. Then task 2, you're going to research into fair trade, and you're going to write a letter to convince someone you know to buy fair trade, and you're going to include those things written in your letter. Task 3, you're going to look at what is an NGO, and you're going to choose an NGO or a charity to research. I've put links to Oxfam, ActionAid, Red Cross, but you really can pick any charity, and you are going to explain how they help countries develop. So if your charity is something like breast cancer, you might want to pick one that focuses more on countries' development. So if you wanted to do a health related one, you could look at someone that helps with disease control in poorer countries in sub-Saharan Africa, for example. And then as a challenge, I want you to put a named project in there to look at a specific country. And then task number 4 is creating a cartoon for one of the Sustainable Development Goals to educate people on why it's important and what it's trying to achieve. So that is a quick summary of all 4 tasks. All of the worksheets and everything you need will be on class charts as usual. Make sure you send it to your teacher by or on Friday, and this will be the last sort of video you get from me like this, because as I said, the next 2 weeks are a little less new knowledge and a little more recapping what we've done. Any questions, please email your teacher. Have a lovely week, Year 7. That's all from me.